Hey everybody, Mike Bloom here. Before we get into today's final installment of the Survivor 50 wish list, I just want to make a quick announcement here at the top. Because the podcast that you're about to get into, at the time we recorded it, we didn't necessarily have a set day or time for our big wrap up, ballot reveal, the polls are open, whatever you want to call it. But I am very excited to announce that this Saturday, August 10th at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific, which is the usual time that the video versions of these podcasts have dropped on YouTube, myself and Rob Cesarino will be coming to you live as we will review who has currently made the ballot so far, do our final round of wildcard picks, and most importantly, open the first round of voting to the fans. And yes, I said first round of voting, but more about that as well as answers to, I'm sure, all the questions you have on Saturday after this podcast is releasing on Thursday. Later in the day on Thursday, or maybe even Friday, I'll release another call to action for any last wild cards you might have, anybody who didn't make the shortlist from the podcast that you want to see on the ballot. So make sure you're tuned into my social media. I'm putting it out on Twitter, on Reddit, on Facebook. Let your voice be heard, and maybe we'll talk about those picks with Rob on Saturday. So again, this Saturday, August 10th at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific, Rob and I will be live going through the ballot, adding some names last minute, and getting to finally open the polls for the vote. Until then, enjoy today's podcast as we talk Survivor 46 with Taran Armstrong. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Survivor 50 Wishlist Podcast, an off-season series where we're trying to figure out who could and should come back for the upcoming returning season of Survivor 50. And it has arrived, folks. We are at the end of the road. We are discussing up to the point of recording the last season of US Survivor to air. And it's a big one, Survivor 46. We've got a lot to get into. It's a very entertaining cast, but who among them will get picked to join the less than several choices we get to add onto this short list? We will see who won over 1,000,000 hearts, including ours. And I did mention ours because it's not just me. It's not me. It's us. And look, if you've been following this series and you've seen me get together with so many illustrious Survivor alumni and RHAP podcasters, to not include this guy would be a big mistake. I am so excited to pull him away temporarily from all of his wall-to-wall coverage inside the Big Brother walls of Big Brother 26. Talk a little bit of a Survivor. It is, of course, the great Taran Armstrong.
Hello. Happy to be here. I think I made a little bit of a big mistake myself because Sam asked me what season I would want to talk about. And I was like, what's the easiest season to talk about? The most recent one, I just watched it, not realizing that then schedule-wise, that would put me right in the middle of the Big Brother season.
I mean, technically speaking, it is still the most recent Survivor season you watch, but quite removed from when the question was first asked to you. So this will be truly your own memory test, Taran. Let's say if you've been studying those days, all 26 of them. But this is an exciting opportunity, not only to talk about this cast and get to see who's going to make our shortlist, but because you were doing a bit of coverage of, other reality shows, getting to cover our neighbors to the north in the final season of Big Brother Canada while we watched everyone else's games go south in Survivor. We haven't really heard a lot of your opinions in a public-facing way about Survivor 46. So put yourself back in the mindset of a young Taran Armstrong back in the end of May 2024. What were your thoughts on this absolute wackadoodle of a season we experienced this year?
I really liked it. I thought it was a fun season. It felt like it felt like it was. I think that a lot of people were feeling that Survivor was feeling stale. That's the sort of vibe I was getting. I remember talking to like Rob about it. That like, man, like it's unfortunate because like the new era kind of came
Mhm.
in hot. It felt like it was going well, but then it felt like the show was feeling a little stale, but then also like the fans, I think, were just feeling a little bit like a little tired, a little bit like we're just seeing the same stuff over and over. So I think my favorite part about 46 was that it felt like the fan base was excited again for Survivor, after the little Banu thing. After that, the fan base was excited about Survivor again. And even though, the ending, I think, caused some controversy and some back and forth, it was like impassioned sort of controversy discussion. And it wasn't about like, oh man, Survivor stale. It was about like, oh man, I can't believe this happened on the show.
Yeah.
And so that was very fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting to look at like the sphere that Survivor has existed in and how that sphere has kind of expanded over the past year. It truly does feel like Survivor has kind of reemerged into the popular zeitgeist. I think part of the reason behind that is sort of this 1-2 punch of 45 and 46. And 46 especially, I said it before, I'll keep saying it. It is maybe one of the memeiest seasons of Survivor ever, and not just a Big Brother 25 meme where people were sometimes in the storage room being like, I don't understand what all these people are doing. How are they so absolute wild personalities? But there are so many huge personalities and huge personality filled moments that have gone viral, that have been some of the more talked about moments in the show in recent memory. And so I mean, I joined the throng to say I was wildly entertained by this season. And I think part of the reason why is, to your point, I think if people feel that the new era is getting quote unquote stale in some way, whether it be tone, structure, cast, etc., I think what everyone can kind of say is that Survivor 46 instilled a lot of old school elements into this new school Survivor, namely when it comes to conflict and animosity. And it's so interesting, especially going after 45 or especially after the show, you see that it is one big love fest for the most part. That like these 18 strangers who were supposed to be put on a beach to compete against each other and bristle against one another due to their personality types have fallen into like pretty good lockstep with each other. Not the case with Survivor 46. And that was apparent from the jump that there are all of these big personalities that are pretty much clashing from the first day to the last day. And it is just watching with mouth agape every single week as people make these wild decisions between, out of nowhere meltdowns, between ridiculous games being played that then turn into strategic decisions, from an unprecedented streak of people going home with idols in their pocket, and culminating in this theme of people turning on their number one allies and finishing with the biggest number one betrayal of them all, which is Maria not voting for Charlie in the end and arguably denying him $1 million in the process. There was just so much baked into this season, in my opinion, and goes to show that from a structural perspective, which Taran, you always speak about as well in terms of game design with Big Brother, this was a season that didn't know it'd be 90 minutes. And so they planned for 60. And so you actually see from that like split tribal council at the final 12 onward, from final 10 all the way to the finale, there are no twists. There's no journeys. There's no risking your vote. There's not even the like, hey, one tribe loses all their votes and then they have to get them back. It is as clean Survivor as we have gotten in quite a few years. And I don't think there's necessarily a lack of causation there with people's enjoyment of the season.
Yeah, yeah, and the lack of actual idol plays as well on top of that. It's yeah, I hadn't even really, noted the lack of twists, but I think it definitely added to my enjoyment of the season, that it just did feel like straight up Survivor, and I think also, like, to some degree, the extra time maybe forced them to explain a little more what was happening in the
Mm,
show, or, like, I like the 90-minute format generally, but I think sometimes when they, or like I would say in 45, where they had planned for 90 minutes, uh, I still felt like that wasn't always going to the best use, because
mm,
for me, my biggest complaint about Survivor in the modern era is that I want more explanation. I'm coming from a Big Brother perspective, where I have
right.
the live feeds. And so I really don't like it when I feel like things are happening that weren't explained to me, and that I don't trust will be explained to me ever. Because then I feel like I've lost the grounded feeling of, like, seeing these people play, and I feel like I'm watching more of a fantasy show where anything can happen at any time.
Hmm.
And so I feel like 46 was a season that, more so than most in the modern era, allowed me to follow the line of strategy of, like, how these things actually happened what people are, have relationships with who, and it really worked for me.
I'm intrigued to see how this cast is going to reflect on the overall casting for 50. I mean, obviously, we're going to put ourselves in those shoes and put people on the short list in just a little bit. But I do feel like, from again, like a popularity perspective, some combination of 45 and 46 almost seems like the Kagayan to me of New Era Survivor, where I feel like, to your point, I think it revitalized a good amount of people's enthusiasm into the direction that Survivor was going, much like Cagayan did 10 years ago. And Cagayan had a large reflection on second chances, on even on something like Game Changers, as an example, where that cast definitely lingered. I think similarly, this is a cast that is full of powerhouse characters and people that are just going to do whatever they want to in the pursuit of winning $1 million. And I am intrigued to see, just depending on what the theme is, how much of 46 are they going to be looking at when it comes to filling their share of 50?
Yeah, and it's so difficult to predict, obviously, because there are, this is the most recent season right now,
Right.
but by the time 50 comes around, it's gonna be a few seasons old. 47, 48, 49 are all coming, and so when I think back to, like, who was in 43, I don't know, which one was 43? The Gabler season? I don't know.
Hmm. The one with
Uh
Gabler, yeah, to some friends parlance.
so it's like that kind of feels a little bit far removed at this point. So by the time 50 comes around, how far removed will 46 feel? And I think it's like still within range that it will
Yeah.
feel like these are still fairly recent players. If anything, it's almost like in a decent sweet spot where they don't feel too recent. So I would expect that we see like a good amount of representation, especially some from some like I think very obvious faces.
All right, well, let's get into said faces and see which ones are obvious and maybe less so when it comes to picks. And we start, as we always have, with our final three. We have our second runner up, zero vote finalist in Ben, our resident rock star. We have our second place finisher, albeit a little controversial, in Charlie. And we have our winner in the form of Kenzie. So allow me to get this out of the way. Every once in a while on these New Era podcasts, I talk about some New Era contestants that are not interested in playing Survivor again. The vast majority of them do, but we've spoken about it with people like Danny McCrae. We've talked about it with Emily, and the winner of our season is another one of them. At the time we are recording this, Kenzie has made it very clear, basically from the moment that that check cleared, that at this moment, this is something she does not want to do again. I think a lot of the things that she ends up citing is some, frankly, very frightening instances that have happened in her real life of, fans approaching her at work sort of unprompted. And I think it's sort of that invasion of private life that has unfortunately kind of come part and parcel with the genre since its roots. That is something that really overwhelmed Kenzie in the moment. She's also pregnant. And while that's going on top of now being really thrust into the public spotlight, it's been something that she is eager to step out of for a brief portion of time. So for the sake of this, Taran, I am going to take her for her word and say that I do not think we should consider Kenzie when looking ahead for 50.
I think so too. I think that that I completely assumed that was the case based on what I'd seen from her, and it's very understandable from so many different angles between the way that this is unfortunately not limited to Survivor or Kenzie. Like this does happen fairly often with Big Brother players and all kinds of different reality show contestants. And that's I think like you hear it from the people like even like Kenzie, and I guess and I think Kenzie had a fairly positive edit, and then maybe there's
Hmm.
a little bit of like, oh well, maybe Charlie should have won kind of stuff going on, uh, but like this can happen whether people hate you, whether people love you. There is definitely an invasion of privacy that can happen, and it's very it can be very uncomfortable. And then on top of that, she's becoming a parent,
Yep.
and obviously would want to focus on that. And having to deal with all of this other stuff on top of it, and I think too there is I unfortunately saw a lot of people, a lot of fans who don't really understand the perspective of somebody who's like, "Whoa, this is a lot." Because it's like, "What do you mean? You were on TV, you won
Yeah,
$1,000,000. Don't you know what
the,
you're signing up for?"
yeah, exactly, the "you signed up for this" crowd, if you
Mhm.
will.
And I think, like, I'm not gonna be able to, like, explain it fully to those people in this moment, but, like, it's a lot more than I think you would expect. It's a lot easier said than done to just be like, "Oh, well, just don't use social media," or whatever, as though social media isn't so extremely prevalent in our lives, in every portion of our lives, and as though, like, it's as easy as just don't look at Twitter or don't look at these places, and the psychological impact that something like that can have. Like, oh,
Mm,
there are places on the internet I'm not allowed to look at for my own
right.
mental health is kind of like a weird thing.
Right, because the assumption is, "Oh, well, these people are gonna be saying shitty things about me," and the fact that, like, that is an automatic guarantee, it can be a really tough thing to reconcile.
Yeah, and then that gets so much worse when it's like, now all of a sudden in my real life, I don't feel safe. I don't feel like I have space around me that is not going to potentially be invaded at any given moment. It can be really mentally taxing. And so I really wish Kenzie the best.
Yep.
Glad she got her check, and that she's, gonna get out of there and live her life.
All right, well, let's talk about somebody who did not get that check. Again, to a lot of fanfare, Charlie Davis. So, Charlie, I would say, amongst a cast of comic characters, was one of the more quite literal resident straight men, though he was very low key funny as well. I still love that Alphabet Game scene where he just like completely clowns on cue in that moment when he's trying to play his game. But Charlie was definitely personified as one of the more stable strategic forces throughout the entire season, where he is someone who seemed to really be in lockstep with Maria until it got to a point where they basically turned on each other. When Maria tries to turn on Charlie, he has the protection of this army of goats, as they've been talking about in postseason press, that ends up running it all the way down to the final four. And for various reasons, he ends up losing. Taran, we've got a blank space, baby. Are we writing Charlie's name in it?
He's definitely a top contender, I think. The classic kind of, I mean, one vote away kind of deal,
Hmm.
and very memorable loss, like having been betrayed by his closest ally in the jury vote. And he was also like a main character of the season. I think there's also, for what it's worth, like, at least top of head, like, I can't really think of somebody who's like seriously competing for his archetype kind of spot,
Mm-hmm.
which is a little weird to say given, you know,
Yeah, well, I mean,
generic white guy, but like,
exactly. The ones we've been talking about were really it seems to be like him, Carson, and Drew from season 45. But I would say that maybe it's due to recency bias, or maybe it's due to, again, this very separate storyline of like Charlie needing this redemption in a manner of speaking. He definitely has the strongest story to return out of the three of them.
yeah, and again, I thought about Drew too, but like the thing about Drew for me is that he feels so different.
Mm,
Like Drew just has such a different energy than Charlie. I could absolutely imagine them both on a cast and not feeling like we have two of the same person by any means. And so like I just there aren't a lot of people weirdly in my mind that like give me Charlie vibes. So I feel like he's definitely has a very strong chance in terms of story, redemption, archetype right now. Main character energy. I think it all kind of works for him, and he's still very young. So
yes, just graduated law school as well, basically right after the finale aired. So I'll also be intrigued to see what Charlie would be perceived as if he played again in 50, because it will film only a year after the 46 finale aired. And we talk about this a bit with like game changers and Aubrey as well, right? Someone that was seen as one of the big strategic power players ends up controversially losing there in second place. And then comes back, and maybe on paper the reputation precedes them, but Aubrey was able to make it all the way to fifth place despite the fact that she had that working against her. And depending on who Charlie is up against as well, no matter what the theme might be, I think he has the chance. Again, his personality is pretty, stable. Again, I don't think he's someone that necessarily pops out immediately as we got to go for Charlie right now on the beach. Like, he seems like a good guy to partner up with, just gotta watch out down the line on both ways. The last person we'll speak about here in the final three is Ben. I love Ben. Ben was someone that clearly struggled a lot out there from a cognitive perspective with panic attacks, seemingly like waking him up pretty much every night. Where he, we open the season with someone not sleeping for a week, and we basically close it out with Ben not sleeping for a week. I do feel like his storyline kind of got concluded with that surprise win in the final immunity challenge where he once again didn't get sleep, but was like the only person surprisingly to not falter at this big new final immunity challenge. I mean, listen, I think Ben's presence would be welcome. Again, I love this cast, and I would honestly not be terribly surprised if, like, we see, I don't know, maybe 16 out of these 18 people come back in some way, shape, or form, depending on what the theme is and how much production loves this season. But for me, especially when we have to winnow it down to a short list, it does feel like Ben's relatively quiet edit and the fact that it does feel his story concluded within the season puts him relatively low on the list for me of chances to return.
I completely agree. I think, like, when I'm thinking about possible returning players, I think about, like, how compelling are they? How likable are they? And I think Ben is a really likable and compelling guy. Given that fact, he got a really quiet edit,
Hmm.
which tells me, like, he's a really likable, compelling guy, and yet that was the best they felt they could do with him, tells me they're probably not that interested in bringing him back.
Yeah. And I encourage people to check out his deep dive with Rob as well if you want a bit more perspective as to maybe some of the stuff that didn't make the edit and the game that was being played outside of the Led Zeppelin lyrics being quoted. So be sure to check that out. But unfortunately, Ben, I know you'll be saying that does not rock to the verdict that we have carried out for you. But check out his band. They're currently on tour. Let's move into this jury, Taran, because we got a lot to talk about within this group. We have a group of three Nami that went from surprisingly running the tribe, one of the most dominant tribes in Survivor history in the pre-merge, to going out 1, 2, 3 because everyone pretty much targeted each other. In our first juror, Soda, our actor turned big social threat in Tevin, and the first, I should actually say the second of many people to go out with an idol in their pocket in one of our like golden boys, MacGyvers of the season in Hunter. Then we get one of our Yanu 3 out here in the form of the first person to find the idol, certainly a personality in her own right between her friendship turned rivalry with Q in Tiffany. We have one of the most outspoken people of the cast, if not in recent Survivor history, going from outcast of Nami to cast out with an idol in her pocket in Venus. We have the enigmatic character that is Quintavious Q Burdett. We have some of you have heard this before in a new era season, the odds-on threat to win, who gets voted out at the beginning of a finale in Maria, who leaves a little bit, despite going out on a big positive fanfare, perhaps leaves a little bit of a different note due to her jury vote for Kenzie. And of course, we have our fallen angel. And if I'm describing Q as an enigma, Liz is just like an absolute riddle. Rumored billionaire, she who is of one of the most iconic meltdowns in Survivor history, forever cementing Applebee's as like uh something that will be forever linked with the show. But Taran, I have to start a discussion of the jury here with someone like Q. When I came into this entire experiment, for me, especially looking at new era seasons, no matter what the format was going to be, there was always going to be a Mount Rushmore to me of new era players that will at least get asked to come back, whether or not they say yes. And for me, that would be Shan, it would be Carolyn,
It would be Jesse.
and it would be Q. Because, I mean, I'm just going to throw it to you here because I want to hear your thoughts on this man.
Yeah, I mean, Q is the biggest no-brainer, I think, of the modern era. I think there's nobody who is more of a lock in terms of getting the ask than Q. I think, like, you mentioned a couple, and I don't disagree, but Q is the most recent right now, and such a compelling character. He is this very, I think, unique combination of extremely funny uh, character, like, he has, like, every angle of what you want, where, like,
Hmm.
he's very unintentionally funny, because you can laugh at him a lot, but at the same time, he is very intentionally funny as well. So like, he's doing the Q skirt. He's, doing these like strategic things, but then you can also kind of feel like, well, what are you doing, Q? Why are you threatening to quit the game? So you have both angles. You have both of those things in terms of character. But then also, he's a very active strategic player who
Right.
has some decent ideas and maybe actually had a shot to do some interesting things in the game while also being a complete disaster strategically. So he has both of those things. He's literally everything that you want. Usually it takes four different characters, four different players to add up to a queue, but he's all of them combined.
Yeah.
And on top of that, he's like super good looking and still very young and still like I would imagine the biggest difficulty is like, is he willing to do it again? He certainly seemed passionate about it, but I know he's like got like billions of dollars or whatever. So, I don't think he needs it, but like, it seems like the biggest no brainer of all.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting because Q was someone that went public after Sia has decided to step away from giving out seasonal fan favorite prizes to say, I'm doing the Q money now. Fans can tell me who to give the money to. But the thing is, ordinarily, they'd be like, okay, now that means that Q wouldn't compete on a season because now he's going to like sit back and dole out the funds, be a little bit of a donor from that perspective. I don't think so. I think Q would go on Survivor again and ask fans, please vote for me to give myself $20,000.
I mean, how funny would that be?
He is just an absolute incredible character. Like you said, he really is everything in the Survivor alphabet contained in one letter. And you brought up a great point as well, in that obviously Q has a lot of funny moments. I think he is such a great confessionalist, so animated, such an interesting way of saying things, obviously leaving with a bunch of catchphrases, big mistake, y'all can cancel Christmas, etc. But there are also these moments like him, feeling like he struggled for the umpteenth time in a challenge and standing by himself saying, why must my road be the hardest? And like him reflecting back on his Friday Night Lights moment, complete with the sound effects and everything. I don't think he was playing that up. And what's interesting is it really did seem like for the first half of the game, Q was in one of the best spots. It seemed like from the Yanu perspective, everyone was feeding information to him. He was the one that was making the decisions. And then literally all it took was getting some food in him after Murgatory. And this man just went off in a complete other direction where like he built the six, but then is immediately targeting people from the six. He's doing the Q skirt. He's playing games of hide and seek. He was actually using that as a test. He is making a big gesture to quit during tribal council, which just completely flummoxes and frustrates everybody. And Taran, you talk about Big Brother, a show that is different in structure in that there are usually only two targets in a given week of Big Brother. Q low-key made the end game like a season of Big Brother. He was the Pawn Star, where every week it was, all right, this time, I think we're going to vote Q out, finally. But for some reason, somebody said, no, we can pick him up. We can get rid of him another time, to the point where he was being used as a tool to let people get voted out with idols in their pocket, only for Q to get voted out with an idol in his Q skirt. It is just an incredible storytelling. I think that also gives him a lot of a second chance narrative as well. I will be intrigued to see. I mean, we saw Coach, for example, like once he kind of realized what people were kind of glimpsing from his character, he kind of doubled down on that to the point of maybe artificiality. I would be intrigued to see how much of that is going to be on Q's mind going into a second season. Is he going to come in with like big mistake merch from the beginning and think more about that than the money, even though he claims he doesn't need the money anyway? But no matter what, it's a slam dunk piece of casting for me.
Yeah, and I think, personally, I think Q is more self-aware than Coach was.
Mm,
So I think that will help. And I just think he's an editor's dream because you can literally make Q anything you want him to be. And that's what editors want. And when I say editors, I mean producers, but like that's what you want in a character because they want to be able to tell whatever story they want to tell. And it's so easy to be like, he's a mastermind. No, he sucks at the game. He's a really, really funny guy. No, you're just laughing at him. Like you can do whatever you want with Q. And I think that's they love that, I think.
We have a wealth of choices in front of us, Taran. Do you want to move up or down from Q here?
I'll follow your lead.
All right, well, let's talk about Maria here because I've talked about this before with bringing back people like Shannon Ricard, with bringing back people like Jesse and Cody. I honestly feel like they'd be leaving money on the table if they did not at least consider bringing back Charlie and Maria because there is so much to pick up from there. They were the strongest pair in the game. They were the ones who were glimpsing at Rome on fire all around them, being like, why is everyone turning on their number one ally? Somehow Maria and Charlie are the only ones that understand that you need numbers to get to the end, only for inevitably the sickness to get to them at a certain point. And they have that awesome scene where they're like both sitting on the boat and like shaking hands and talking about how tough it is that they have to get rid of everybody else while they're also in confessionals saying they have to get rid of each other. And it ends amicably in the moment at the final five. Then Maria, for a variety of reasons, chooses to vote for Kenzie instead, which again makes the vote 5-3. The rumor is that Ben would have voted for Charlie at least in a tie, meaning that that seems to be one of the key votes that Charlie lost on that would have given him the win. And Charlie and Maria have both communicated that in the months following the season, and especially I think in re-engaging in some of the things that happened there towards the end, that they are, cordial with one another. But I do not necessarily think that the Uncle Charlie family moniker is being doled out anymore. Outside of that, I think Maria is somebody that was a sizable character too. She is the oldest person on this season, but I think again, much like we've seen a bunch in this new era, was kind of able to subvert that. I was able to be again the person to beat towards the end, and some would argue were it not for a little bit of a bending of the rules in the challenge where she goes out, she would have made it to Final Four fire making, where she probably wins that. And who knows? That's the fun thing about this season as well, is I feel like even the most perfect players were messy. We can never forget Maria deciding that Q and Liz should do a game of rock, paper, scissors to figure out who should go on reward, despite the fact that Q had just memorably gone to Applebee's. And so I do think that Maria brings a lot by herself as a character, but I also feel like there's just so much appeal in bringing her back alongside Charlie and seeing what phase two of that relationship looks like.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that my initial instinct when thinking about Maria was how I felt about her edit in the season.
Mm,
Because again, like I'm trying to get into the headspace of like the producers and how they
right.
feel about these people. And when I feel like they're underusing somebody in a season, that's like not the best sign for me that they're looking to bring them back.
Mm,
And I personally felt like Maria was underused throughout season 46.
mm-hmm,
When she has the late surge in the edit, it wasn't super convincing to me because I felt like she had been so under the radar for so much of the season. Them giving the spotlight to Charlie over her for so long,
mm-hmm,
that when she started to step into the spotlight, I was like, "This feels a little bit like a misdirect to me," and I think it was. And so, the question in my mind then is, did they just feel like she wasn't compelling enough to be showing throughout that, portion for them
mm,
in terms of the story they wanted to tell? Or was it intentional to make sure that we were on Charlie's side, at the end of the season because Charlie makes it further?
mm,
So, like, if that's the case, I think there's probably plenty of room that the producers see with Maria as a character. And then you do have, as you pointed out, the compelling story of if you bring them both back, like how does that work? Like, do we get some drama there?
mm-hmm.
Are they going to work together, pretend to work together, target each other? There's all kinds of different storylines you can go there. And so I don't know. I don't know that like I think of Survivor as a show that tends to do like rivalries all that much.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
we did a little bit of a deep dive into the casting, surprisingly, of heroes versus villains with Stephen
mhm,
Fishback, and like there were some there, right? Colby and Jerry. If Sierra from Token Sheens was supposed to make the season, her and Tyson. It seems like there is a little bit of it. So I think it also again depends on how much are they trying to bring New Era into this. Like if it's specifically half and half, and they're only limited to like 10 New Era players at most. Yeah, it might not necessarily make the cut if they end up casting closer to like 12, 13, 14 new era people, there might be some room to address that. But I also say, on top of me saying in previous podcasts, oh, they should bring Shannon Ricard back. Oh, they should bring Jesse and Cody back. One of these pairs wouldn't necessarily make it on there unless it was a Rivals theme season.
Yeah, and I do think there are a lot of options to choose from when it comes to these, like, front runners that got voted out in the
Mm-hmm.
finale, as you said, where it feels like that's a character that they basically tried to build up every season at this point, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's another, like, kind of point against her, I think. I think she's definitely an option, but she's
Yeah.
probably not super high if I'm trying to, like, predict this, here.
Let's talk about Liz, one of the most unique people that has ever played Survivor. And I'm just speaking about her list of allergies. Of course, Liz comes in and is relatively quiet, basically, in the first part of the game. Nami is not going to tribal council, and she is just kind of being shown as somebody that's a bit of the quirkier personality, where she is telling everybody about the fact that she makes so much money at home, which she later reveals was a guise to get her dragged to the end as a goat, where then she can kind of go mask off at the final tribal council and be like, look at my bank statements. I'm a single mom. Of course, I'm not a millionaire. She nearly gets there, but finishes just short. And again, it's probably most remembered for that Applebee's tirade of tearing into Q, something that went viral on TikTok. Certainly something that is one of the most well remembered parts of this season. And I go back and forth because, like, I would always want more Liz Wilcox on my screen because, again, I never know what she's going to do at any point in time. On the other hand, we have talked in this process about certain characters that could kind of be left in that season as, like, you had your time in the spotlight and it was absolutely wonderful, but I am good with where we finished it there. And I feel like Liz might be that for me, with her tragically losing fire making due to the extended ligaments in her arms.
Yeah, so the thing for me is, and maybe you can help me with this, if I'm thinking about, like, who is the character that they're casting for this season? Who is
Mhm.
the, like, the one that's gonna give them some goofiness, the one where they can put, like, a different job title under their lower third
Mhm.
every time they show up on the screen, or, a different wealth level maybe, who is going to, like, hopefully give them some drama potentially, who's and Liz also was, like, somebody who's actively playing the game as well, which again, I think is always helpful. And so for me, and again, I'm trying to go vibes based here.
Yeah.
I can't really think of a new era player that fits that archetype better than Liz.
Yeah, I mean, I think Carolyn is probably the next best in that here's someone
That's
who
very true.
has this quirky personality, makes a lot of sound bites happen, but even more so than Liz, I think, was one of the main movers and shakers of the season.
I see, I think Carolyn didn't ping for me because in my head, she's more player.
Mm,
Like, she's definitely a big character, and I think you're right. If somebody is to take Liz's spot, it's probably Carolyn.
yeah.
But I definitely saw her as more intertwined with, like, the main story,
Mhm.
and the main gameplay. But I think you've convinced me that Liz is not quite maybe as obvious a choice if they are looking for that specific spot.
Let's move to the other side of Q here. We got to talk about Venus. Nice, as it were, but it was not necessarily a nice time for her out there. From the beginning, Venus felt like she was not vibing with the Nami tribe. At certain points, thought that she was purposely being kind of held at arm's length by the rest of her group. So when she finally gets the chance to play at the merge, unfortunately, that reputation kind of carries over into this new group of people where she gets targeted in these first couple of votes, but she does get picked up as kind of a person by some of these bigger players as things go down the stretch. But regardless of the position that she was in, Venus was always going to let us and the players know how she felt about them. Again, I think a lot of the aspects of this old school survivor that people are talking about is really represented in somebody like Venus, both on and off screen. I do feel like Venus, yet again, is one of these lightning in a bottle cast members that I think, especially again in a modern day where people might, unfairly in my opinion, but still kind of decry like the too nicey nice stuff going on from the new era in particular. I mean, this was the season that brought back Spicy Jeff, and it felt like Venus is kind of the whole spice cabinet in the stuff that she was saying about people both to their faces in confessional and online as well. Honestly, I think the only thing that might not put Venus in consideration would be that she was quite open at points on social media and quite messy, and there might be some worry as to like, okay, are you going to spill some stuff? Are you going to indicate too much on social media because of your penchant to kind of just like reflexively react to things? But listen, we've had previous Survivor players post pretty flagrantly on social media during their season and get called back for subsequent seasons. So I don't think it's necessarily anything to completely count out Venus from coming back a second time.
Yeah, I do think you're right to flag it. I think that, especially in the modern era, production has been very tight-fisted about, like, wanting to control the narrative more,
Mm,
wanting to limit the amount of press that people are able to do, and wanting to keep things under wraps as much as possible. I'm sure they are very aware of how much more mess can come from an all-star season. There's
mm,
prior relationships, things get really weird sometimes, and, I do think that they might fear somebody like Venus who's willing to just, like, spill things. Because it's one thing to be messy online, it's another to just, like, say things that they might not want to be said
right.
online. There's 2 different kinds of things. Um, I hope that is not I do not like this policy that they seem to have developed. I hope that does not impact her chances because I think
Hmm.
that she would be very fun on an all-star season. And she also seems to, for what it's worth, get along with a ton of alumni.
Yeah.
We may even see a slightly different Venus. The only other, I think, potential negative that I saw, again, if I'm looking at the edit, it felt like they weren't sure what to do with her once her feuds ended.
Hmm.
She kind of fades into the background, after, like, Tevin leaves, essentially, maybe after Hunter leaves. I mean, that wouldn't be much, but, like, I remember her kind of being absent for a couple of episodes. I mean, even her boot episode kind of felt like, "Whoops, she's gone." So that's maybe a little concerning if you're a producer and you're thinking about, like, if I want Venus on the cast, are we gonna be able to get consistent content from her, from art? And again, when I say that, like, that's I'm trying to get into their heads. I
Hmm.
think Venus is great content always.
Yeah.
But if they're not doing something with the player, it indicates to me that they may not think, of that player as much in a future season.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Venus and Q would do as well is like this is by far the most chaotic season of the new era. Just with again everything that was happening in every single episode and the unpredictability of it. And I do think two of the agents behind that were people like Q and Venus that you just never knew what they were going to say and how they were going to react in any portion of time. And you do bring up an interesting point in that, yeah, Venus has been going to these events during the course of her season and does seem to get on well with a lot of new era people as well. So it would be interesting to see her come in and possibly have more friends than you may think, considering the contentiousness with which her season happened. Or could it just be an opportunity for her to start new rivalries? Who's to say?
Who's to say?
I want to keep moving down here and talk Tiff with you, Taryn. For someone who gets into Tiffs to Tiff herself, because I've said it so much now that it doesn't even feel like she's underrated. It feels like she's just rated. But I love Tiffany. I've loved Tiffany ever since I got the chance to talk with the cast out there and she and I were just vibing. I love her boldness. The fact that she told me in our interview that her hot take was that she doesn't know why people don't know how to shut the F up and shouldn't tell anyone about their advantages, only for her to find the first idol in the game and then basically immediately tell Q and Kenzie about it. But again, it's the fact that she is willing to make these big and bold claims and sit on that confidence. And to your point about the Q edit, sometimes be wrong about it, but like that's what we love about Survivor players is the ability to swing with the bat and not necessarily wait for the perfect pitch at the perfect time. Tiffany, I think, is also
a pretty underrated personality. I think in a cast that is full of big characters and a lot of comic moments. I mean, Tiff is the person who brought us Stop Making the Block Hot as she's trying to encourage Banu from having yet another meltdown at Tribal Council. She's the one who has that reaction when Banu does the Million Hearts quote of like, if he wants to win a million hearts, he can volunteer. Like Tiffany had, I think, a little bit of that frankness to her and veracity that I really enjoy in Survivor players. She obviously has the ability to find idols. She has the risky behavior to also sit on said idols to her detriment. And again, she has the capacity to not only build up bonds, but clearly not be afraid to speak her mind when she feels those bonds get crossed. As we show with like her and Q being thick as thieves, but then getting to the point where the two of them are getting in arguments at opposite sides of the line right before a reward challenge. Like, I think Tiffany brings so much, and I'm just willing it to existence. I could see this where maybe from a producer's perspective, she's not like part of the top characters that come to mind when you think of the season, but I think she would be a really good returnee.
I do too. I think Tiffany should be a top choice. I worry that she's not.
Mm,
I think as you said, underrated personality, and I think that's probably the problem. I think that she has a ton of personality. She was a great character on the season, but she's a great character who I think gets a little lost in the shuffle on a season with Q and Liz and
hmm
Venus. And so I think for that reason, it might be harder to like pinpoint Tiffany from that when you're thinking of good characters. Luckily, she was also really great strategically, but I do think she faces a lot of competition in that spot, this kind of like mid jury, really promising player spot that I think a lot of seasons have a Tiffany
Yeah, I
in
mean,
that
it's
spot.
specifically the place she goes out, final eight. That's like where Shan goes out, where High goes out, where Franny goes out.
Fran, yeah. It's a there's a lot of competition there. And so she has recency, which is helpful. But with that recency comes a season where there are so many other big characters, and I think that hurts her. I think she would be such a great pick to
Yeah.
bring back. And I hope that they are considering her. And I'm worried they may not.
Completely agree. Let's talk about Hunter. So Hunter is somebody who was definitely talked about, especially in comparison to someone like Jonathan, as one of the best challenge beasts of the new era. Somebody that just like was not necessarily presented as like this hulking giant physical superhero, but was just really good at these challenges. You know, he's the one who was able to pull off something with physics. He is a science teacher where they have to go over this like big rolling pin in the water, and he just comes up with the idea of like pull Tevin over, and I'll just use the momentum to pull myself over as well. He is somebody that is really good at like those carnival game esque endings to challenges where there's like landing sandbags. He of course was somebody who didn't necessarily 3D print puzzles, but ran Survivor games for his students. So he had an entire warehouse, basically his own challenge graveyard full of challenges he's done in the past that obviously gave him a lot of aptitude. And hell, he also shows that despite Yule saying that the get a grip challenge is why you don't see elephants running up trees, despite being the biggest guy, Hunter crushed the competition in that type of challenge. So even shows from like an individual perspective, he is somebody that can surprise. On top of that, he is able to find the re-hidden idol. And yes, it does look foolish in the moment with him going out, despite the fact that he was objectively told, hey, your closest ally left, you're next. He has said in postseason press that he was trying to like figure out the numbers and basically thought he could kind of skirt past it. He didn't want to necessarily Tyson in Heroes versus Villains himself out of the game by playing it. Unfortunately, those numbers were not accurately predicted, and he ends up getting blindsided here. I think my major reservation about Hunter, Taran, because I do think he's someone that production would really keep in mind, especially as a display as well of the meta aspects of someone that was able to benefit from getting involved with a form of Survivor prior to coming on the show, is honestly, are him and Jonathan competing for the same spot?
Yep, I think that's the biggest problem is that this is again is an archetype that's facing some hefty competition.
Mm.
And, you know, is it possible that both him and Jonathan get on the cast? Yeah, I think that's possible.
Yeah, if you do two
But I
tribes and you want to put one of them on each tribe.
yeah, maybe. But, like, I do think Jonathan is the stronger pick if you're thinking about
Quite literally,
production's
yeah.
viewpoint because, yeah, just visually, he fits that archetype a little better. You know, when Jonathan is literally carrying his tribe across the water or whatever, like, that's a little more sort of, like, visually stimulating than, like, Hunter coming up with a clever way to solve the
Mm,
challenge. Jonathan is also a more abrasive character who's going to give you more drama. Like Hunter is a pretty laid back, chill kind of guy. The only drama that came out of him was like pulled out of him by Venus.
yeah.
Um, and so, as a character, I don't think you're getting as much. And I do think there's still an appeal there. I think the reason why a lot of Hunter fans are Hunter fans is because he's laid back and not
Mhm.
very high drama. But when you're then choosing between him and Jonathan, if you are, I think that like the producers are going to pick Jonathan most of the time. And so that's definitely going to be a big hurdle for him.
Let's talk Tevin, shall we? You could tell that Survivor loves Tevin. I mean, the first thing we get in Survivor 46 is Tevin delivering a monologue about what Survivor is. He is providing the thesis statement of the show. He is heard describing this instead of someone like Jeff, who ordinarily does the narration. Even in the On Fire podcast, Jeff during 46 would like go back to his casting notes on each of these people and had so many kind words for someone like Tevin. And that to me buoys his chances of getting on this season because look, he does finish in 10th place, which certainly there are people that we have put on this list who have finished that way or even before it. But I also would say, like, again, there are so many other huge chaotic personalities that stand out in this cast. And despite Tevin being this incredibly animated person that, was born for the stage, it does feel like his edit kind of gets tamped down a little bit. I mean, he has this big thing where he decides in the moment, all right, you know what? It's time for me to turn on soda. Soda gotta go to, and it's time for me to take a drink of that delicious blindside beverage once that split tribal council happens. But I would say, like, if we're looking back on the course of the season, I love Tevin. I love talking with Tevin out there. He was my winner pick, and he's incredibly memorable to me. I do wonder how memorable he would be to bring back, but considering again how much the show really loved the stuff that he was bringing, I would not be surprised in the least if he ends up showing up on a returnee season.
I agree. I think, like, I think there are a lot of obvious drawbacks in terms of like his placement and how far he was sort of away from a lot of the episodes. But yeah, he's definitely somebody that I could see popping up for sure. I think he's an option for this season.
Let's talk about his former partner in crime before they ended up turning adversaries, I suppose, in the form of Soda. Soda also has this really unique edit in that she is someone who is presented as a very animated person as well, and so her and Tevin, despite becoming almost competitors later, are really in lockstep for the beginning there to the point where they, alongside Hunter, kind of run the Nami tribe throughout the pre-merge. But then there's also this like pseudo rivalry between her and Venus, where there's the stuff involving Soda snatching the idol, or nobody listening to Venus when her foot got run over by a cart, or Venus accusing Soda of voting against her at the Mergatory Tribal Council. Like the two of them were never able to get on the same page, and it culminates with Venus being able to get the Segas on her side to get rid of Soda. Again, I think Soda is a really fun personality, and I would not be surprised if the show brought her back because she is somebody that clearly was doing a lot of wheeling and dealing. And I think one of the other reasons why she goes is that she was presented as somebody that could win the game. That's why Tevin targets her. But I do think that there are other people in the new era that I could see in this archetype above Soda, who ends up becoming our first juror.
Yeah, I think I would be a little surprised to see Soda, to be honest. I
Mm.
think just in terms of how much screen time she had on the season, it felt like we got just enough to see that she was like a big figure as a target and not really enough to really understand who she is as a person. And I think she even, if I'm recalling correctly, had some complaints about her edit
Yes.
as well, which I think are perfectly valid thoughts and feelings to have. And unfortunately, I think production does not like when you complain about your edit. So I can't imagine that that has helped her. Though I certainly wouldn't want to discourage people from complaining about their edit because I think they should, regardless of how the fans may feel about it. I think edits are a very bad thing coming from a Big Brother perspective. But I think there are a few things working against her on top of like her placement here. And so I would be a little surprised to see Soda. Well, not like incredibly surprised, but maybe a little surprised.
All right, well, let's move into this pre-jury group. And we have amongst us working our way down from the top. We have, we talked about the spice cabinet, but we've got a spicer himself in the form of Tim. We have our mergatory boot in the form of Mariah Gaynor can't jump. We have our first person voted out with an idol in her pocket in the form of Jem. We have, of course, the one, the only Banu, that whether, you have your differing opinions on it, was pretty much the show for episodes 3 and 4. We have a guy that was medevac for one of the most out of nowhere reasons ever in Randon, who ended up pinching a nerve to the point that it required getting medevac to get actual immediate treatment for. And then we have our first two boots here from Yanu, the disaster tribe, that were unfortunately kind of served up with how disastrous their time ended up being over the course of the season. We have our Ant Queen Jess. Taran, we gotta start with David frickin' Jelinski, because it has been a long time, not since Reem, but you would argue even before that, since like Zayn Knight, have we seen a first boot have such a name recognition impact on this season? As someone that was there for the infamous, I'm pretty sure Seven Meets Several Jeff moment, I had no idea the continual afterlife that would have, even through to its offline days.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say straight up, I think there are two people in this list of players that I think are worth sort of like that have an actual shot, and I
I
think the
agree,
others
yeah.
probably don't. And Jelinski is one of them.
Yeah.
I think that weirdly, as the first boot, I think that they were very tickled by several. They used it in their episode titles. Jeff brought it back a few different times. On top of that, he's clearly like such a character and a huge fan of the show. Definitely would be willing to come back. It's like my second shot, my several shot, whatever the case may be. It's a bit of a wild card pick.
I mean,
do I
it's
think the
not. Is
odds
it
are
not too dissimilar from David Alexander showing up on Big Brother 22?
yeah, exactly. Like I don't think the odds are high necessarily, but like I do think there's absolutely a chance that Jelinski shows up on our screens at some point. If it's not 50, maybe another time. But yeah, I think there's definitely a shot.
Yeah, because not only that, he goes out. To say he flamed out would be an understatement. This is a guy who quits the sweat task over, like, again, maybe a basic misdefinition of a word, slash, like, it was just too much of a struggle. He was the one who gets sent on a journey, and then in a game of basically bluffing, decides the only way to win is not to bluff and loses his vote in the process. There was even more stuff that happened that didn't make the episodes, like he cut up his feet. He found out he was allergic to coconut. He lost his water bottle. The first tribal council was just absolutely wild. And so I think if they were especially able to do like a returning season that was pre-merge versus post-merge, like he would be a shoe-in on the pre-merge tribe for me, just because there was so much potential there. And I mean, he's bound to do better, right? Or has the path that Francesca laid an outcome that has to be repeated?
I don't think it matters. I think that's the beauty of bringing Jelinski back.
He is the monster, and we know the monsters always return in monster movies somehow. I'm going to take a bold guess and say the other person that you think would be considered by production would be Banu.
Yes, I think
For,
Banu is the other option.
yeah, for many reasons. Again, I think there were a lot of understandable comments about how much time this guy was taking up, that despite the fact that we like 90-minute episodes in general, you felt those 90-minute episodes when we kept going back to Banu.
Yes.
I mean, again, I very much understand what people are coming from in terms of like Banu overkill and the edit. He did so many freaking funny things, in my opinion. Whether it was like him counting all the reasons why he's strong and then what does it make? holds out a fist, whether it's him going through the 5 stages of grief when he's going, of like, asking Kenzie to look for an idol, begging on his knees to Tiffany, fuming at his tribe in private. He was just such an absolutely wild character. And the even wilder thing is that it seems like he'd want to come back and do it again, which again is pretty out there, considering that this is a guy that had to be coached on how to not even lie, but like obscure information when asked a question at tribal council. You would think that he'd be someone to say, I tried Survivor once, not the game for me. All the power to those people who think it is. I'm going to go do my other type of stuff. Bonu out. But it seems like for whatever reason, he wants to come back and do it. And I go back and forth. I could see this show, and especially with his story as well and where he came from, if they could say like, well, listen, we loved what he brought. We got to give him another chance. I could also see a world, though, where they say, I mean, he wasn't a very good player, and we want to bring back a good amount of wild cards, but not dump out the entire wild card bucket with somebody like Banu.
Yeah, I think he would be a lock to come back, if not for the fact that he was so disastrous at actually playing the game that,
Mhm.
like, even somebody like, say, Philip, who is, I think, the classic kind of like, bring Philip back, we
Mhm.
want more Philip. Like, Philip made it to the finals, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, and then Philip came back and then was again, like, heavily involved in the strategy. Banu was just such a fish out of water when it came to the strategy. People were trying to Philip him, but
Yeah, I mean,
it
Q
just
quite literally did. He told to his
yes.
face, "You're my Philip."
It didn't work because he was too Banu-y. And so I think if you are looking at this from a producer's perspective, it's like you run the risk of, if you bring back Banu, just the same exact thing happening, and that's bad TV.
Mhm.
And so I think that's the risk there, the danger, and perhaps why we might not see Banu back.
Yeah, and I know that Jeff, I think, has been quoted a couple times saying like he doesn't necessarily think entirely about placement when it comes to returnees. However, again, we don't know what the theme is for Survivor 50, but I would imagine they'd be a little more hard pressed to like bring back a 14th place, 15th place finisher over somebody who like, I mean, even look at somebody from 41 like Nasir, who again brings that like infectious energy and positivity without the abject mess and the fact that he made the jury. I think that could be a reason why Banu unfortunately does not get the nod here.
I don't believe Jeff for a second. I think placement absolutely matters. And I guess I would say more so than placement, screen time matters.
Mm,
And I think that, like, if you're bringing back people, you want the audience to remember them. You want them to be excited about seeing them again. You don't want the audience to feel like, wait, who is that?
yeah,
And I think that's why screen time matters. Screen time also matters because it's an indication of how production feels about that player in the first place.
very true.
So yeah, I would say if Jeff is saying, placement doesn't matter because Banu got more screen time than half this cast, I agree with him. But if Jeff is saying placement doesn't matter, therefore, like, Mariah will be able to be on this cast, I'm like, unfortunately, I love Mariah, but, like,
Yeah.
I don't think quite as much.
Yeah, and with no offense again to sort of like broad brush, Tim, Mariah, Randon, Jess, I do think for various reasons they wouldn't be heavily considered. I would say that I'd be interested in seeing Jem come back. I think
Me too.
Jem was kind of an indicator that like it wasn't just Yanu that were the messes, but kind of everyone had a messy moment on this season, and Jem was also pretty damn ferocious. The very frank conversations that her and Tim had, where Tim's like, oh, how's that women's alliance coming along? And Jem's like, oh yeah, how's your final two with Ben? And the fact of the matter is she is somebody who found an idol and purposely led her tribe on like a 3-day wild goose chase, digging for nothing and getting bit up by ants just for entertainment's sake, only to get voted out with said idol in her pocket.
I think Jem has a lot of untapped potential.
Mm.
And
Uncut gem, if you will.
Sure. And so, I think she would be a great pick. But I think, it's tough because I would imagine that especially if you're like a casual audience member, you're probably gonna have a hard time remembering. She wasn't on the season very long. And so that's maybe gonna be a tough pull. But again, with a more recent season, a little bit more of a shock. I wouldn't be super shocked to see Jeff.
Mhm. All right. Taran, we got a big series of decisions to make here because I think we talked about a very heavy amount of people that we would not be shocked to see back that could or should deserve a chance, but we have to get it down to 5. Banu again making the fist. Let's start with like who's your chalk number 1, either from like a practical perspective or
Q.
a desire perspective that you want to put on there.
It's Q. It's Q.
Yeah,
It's always Q.
Q. I would add Charlie onto that. I think that Charlie is somebody who, again, that narrative really precedes overall, and I still do think that it'll be fresh in the minds of viewers as to how it all ended for him. And so I do think Charlie would be another pretty big lock from the season.
Yeah, I think Charlie's my number 2.
Yeah, so then it gets a little bit thornier because I think you've brought up some really good pros and cons for each, specifically from the mind of like who production would want to bring back. I do think to me it would probably be some combination of like I would probably put Venus on there as like kind of a chalk. Again, I think that's one of the larger senses as to an earlier point, how much are they going to factor in stuff outside of the show into a casting pick? But if they don't necessarily consider it, I do think she is somebody that would be heavily considered.
I'd be willing to put Venus in there.
Yeah. Good. So we won't incur her wrath as well. It also works doubly. But then I'm thinking about like there's a tier of, to me, Maria, Tiffany, Hunter, Tevin. Like this, like 2 out of those 4, I think, and maybe a little bit of Liz as well. So again, it's a really tough job. But are you leaning any certain way out of those 5 I just mentioned?
I think I'd cut Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jonathan just has too much of a lock, and again, maybe something's wrong with Jonathan. Maybe he doesn't want to do it, or maybe they pick both. Um, but I feel like I'd probably cut Hunter from the list.
Yeah, I would agree with that, that he unfortunately might be a bit typed out by it. So I might. It's tough because again, I think Tevin is someone that has a good chance of showing up, but would he have a chance of showing up more than Maria and Tiffany? Is the question.
Hmm. It is a good question. I do think Heaven probably brings an energy that is somewhat unique.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm trying to think of like who brings that. Like certainly there are plenty of different kinds of narrators that the show has, but Tevin has like super big narrator energy where like
Yeah.
even when he's not the narrator of the season, he's still the narrator of the season. And so I do feel like he isn't competing as much for his
Mm-hmm.
spot. But he is a bit further down the placement and the screen time list. So yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
quite sure
I
there.
mean, Jeff did say on his podcast if he could have a Tevin every season, he could.
That's pretty strong evidence to me.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty strong evidence to put him on as a spot here. And so it's tough. Now we have to pick between Maria and Tiffany. And, is the storyline appeal of Maria weighing out what you and I would like to see, which would be a Tiffany return here? And all that is to say, we do have this convention where, by popular demand, we'll certainly bring in some wild cards. I have a feeling at least one of these people is going to be a wild card. But are you leaning in any particular direction at this moment?
Man. Um I think this might be personal preference. I think I'm leaning a little Tiffany. Um, but yeah, I don't know if I'm letting like my own desire to see Tiffany again and get in the way of that.
You know what? This is a wish list. Why don't we do one final time granting a wish here? I am your genie, Taran Armstrong. We'll put Tiffany on with the 5th spot here because I also be intrigued to hear from people if they think Maria. I'm good to put Tiffany on the 5 with the with the parentheses of I would not be surprised at all if I come back in the next couple days and I also put Maria on, and hell, I wouldn't be surprised if also I put Jelinski on as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are just a lot of options, and again, with
Yeah.
this being the most recent season right now, Like I feel like a lot of those options feel fairly realistic. I still wouldn't count Liz out. I
Yep.
definitely wouldn't count Maria out. I wouldn't even count Hunter out. And I can't even count Jelinski out. So like, yeah, it's definitely a big, they're not hurting for choice with 46.
Absolutely. It's a bad problem to have that we had so many people to pick between. And who knows, we might have several on the list from this season after all. Last thing we like to do, Taran, looking outside of Survivor, if there is someone from this season that you would want to see on another reality show, who would it be? I will just say, Jelinski is a Big Brother fan. He got
I
into
mean,
the show through Big Brother.
put Q on anything.
Oh, yeah.
For me, it's like it's almost like a cheat code for any answer about this season is I'll just say Q. But you know, I wouldn't be mad to see Jelinski on some. But like, here's the thing: if Jelinski is on something, I want Q to be there too. You know what I mean?
That'd be interesting. I mean, I talked about this with Drag Race recently. I just feel like Paramount should be printing money if they do, like, in the 9 months of the Big Brother off season, do like a month-long season of Big Brother with only Survivor contestants. And like, how much fun would that be? Like, imagine Jelinski leaning back, full like Cedric 21-year-old energy, talking about like all the alliances that he's made and the fact that he's getting clocked left and right. That'd be so incredible.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he'd be doing the stacking HOH competition and just be like, you know what? It's not worth time.
Yeah, or like he would try to come up with a lie about whether someone's going to get put up, and then he'll just stop conversation, be like, "All right, I'm just going to tell the truth right now. I am going to put you up."
I do have the power, actually.
Yes, he's going to absolutely. Him and Quinn have the same hairstyle and probably the same amount of tight-lipped qualities when it comes to just blabbing about the powers. So it's something that'd be fun to see. I've talked about this on other podcasts. I would love to see like Tiffany on something like The Challenge. I feel like she brings it physically and also has that perspective of drama and conflict where she is not afraid to speak her mind. I mean, Venus would be great as well. I just feel like from a physical perspective, I do fear for Venus's medical bills if she like winds up in a hall brawl, but also like put Venus on any show.
Venus on Big Brother, I think, is a great choice.
Yeah, or Venus on the Traitors. I think Venus on the Traitors would be very fun, considering that she is not afraid to call people out and also not afraid to like hold personal grudges and have that carry over into strategy. I think her bristling with the Bravo Labs would be a very fun sight to see.
Yeah.
All right. So that's all we wrote or spoke for today. The 5 people that we are adding, the final first round added to the short list here with ages. We have our runner-up, Charlie Davis, 26. We have Q Burdett, 30. Venus Vapa, 25. Tiffany Irvin, 33. And Tevin Davis, 25. I'm sure there'll be more to come, but won't be a long time before we re-engage with these choices. Because Taran, now I do believe it is time to vote. At some point in the next couple days, I'll be getting together once again with Rob Cesarino. We are going to be revealing the full ballot out of all 46 seasons. We'll be going through who got added on through the shortlist pods, as well as another round of wild cards by popular demand. So make sure you tune into my socials at a Mike Bloom type. Actually, at the time you're listening to this, it might already be up there. I will put out a petition like I did for the first half of this experiment for anybody from seasons 23 through 46 that didn't initially make the ballot that you would want to see added as a wild card. Rob and I will throw them in there. We'll review the whole ballot, which is looking probably to get close to like 200 names. And then the polls will be open as we engage in the first round of voting. And yes, I said first round, but more on that with the next podcast. In the meantime, Taran, thank you. This was awesome to get the opportunity to engage in discussion about not only a season that you haven't really spoken about, but also you as someone who has a lot of fascination and expertise on like reality TV production and the thinking of the men and women behind the curtain. For you to kind of get in those heads of what makes a returnee. It was a very welcome time, and I'm thrilled that you got to join me today.
Well, it's easy. I just think like, what would a supervillain think? And then,
they say villains don't exist in Modern Survivor anymore, Taran.
That's because it's the producers.
Well, you have your hands full, to say the least, going on in a Big Brother house, even if it doesn't have Q or Venus or Jelinski in it. Is there anything you want to plug right now to the listeners of RHAP who might not be tuned into the coverage?
Plenty of Big Brother coverage going on right now. It's always a fun time. If you have not tapped into Big Brother before, it's a choose your own adventure. You get to pick how invested you want to be. It's great. And you get to experience the real intrigue of Big Brother, especially if you've never actually watched it or paid attention to the feeds. I'm talking about producers. I'm talking about edits. Um, you will never be able to experience what it's like to be able to see what is happening via like the raw footage
Mm-hmm.
versus how things are edited. It will give you an entirely new perspective on the other shows that you do watch, like Survivor. In terms of just like how easily it is to manipulate an edit and make you feel a certain way about a person that you might otherwise feel the complete opposite about if you saw what was actually happening. And so just getting to see that is really interesting. And on top of that, sometimes it's also a good show. So that's fun too.
There we go. So feel free to check it out. If you were a Survivor fan and you didn't check out like when Sari was actually in the house last season and now you want to check out Big Brother, go ahead, as Taran again has daily coverage of it, as our recurrence of daily podcast is starting to come to an end. We've got the ballot reveal coming up in the next couple days where again, Rob and myself will be reviewing who has been put on the short list so far and who we're adding before we finally release it to the public. And it is in your hands. I will do a bit of a blanket thank you on the next podcast, but I just want to say now, while we're doing the final seasonal reviews of these, how much fun this has been to get to talk with you, Taran, and all the various guests about their Survivor opinions, their perspectives on 700 players at this point, and to you all as well. I mean, listen, everyone certainly has opinions on players and who they want to see come back, but it has been such an incredible experience for me. I said it before, but this kind of feels like this is a culmination to me of like nearly 25 years of fandom and something that I enjoy doing every single second of. And I can't wait to see how the ballot turns out. No matter what, this has been such a fun experiment to look back in the history of Survivor and truly think about, if we got a chance to bring back these people, no matter what the theme might be, who would we look at? It's been a nice stroll down memory lane, including recent history. And I'm excited to see how it's all going to shake out. And we will start to see, as again, next podcast you'll hear from me is when I'll be talking with Rob Cesternino to review the ballot and officially open the polls. Thank you all so much for listening. Until next time, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.